What's going on, everyone? So Golden State Warriors have not had the season that they hoped or assumed that they would. Warriors currently, at the time of recording this video, are still the 12th seed in the Western Conference. Now, they are only half a game out of the Utah Jazz for the 10th seed. And if they win today, they have a game today against the Atlanta Hawks off of a back-to-back. If they win that game, they would actually be tied then for the 10th seed. So that's huge. They need to get this win. It's very important as they have this big uphill battle and climb. But even then, what are the Warriors doing? Now, I don't think any team wants to see the Warriors in the playoffs, right? Like, imagine, you had to see the Warriors. You're the Thunder. You work so hard. You're the number 1 seed, and your first round matchup is against the 8th seeded Golden State Warriors, right? What a consolation prize. As bad as the Warriors have been this year, again, you don't want to face that team, especially in the playoffs. But here's the problem. They still have to get to the playoffs. And if they finish the season as the 9th or 10th seed, they have to win 2 games just to get into the playoffs. And that's not where they wanted to be. That's not where they planned to be. And the question is, can they find a way to turn it around? Now, personally, just my thoughts. Of course, I want to hear yours down in the comments below, so let me know. Also, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. But I think you basically trade Klay Thompson and you trade Chris Paul. Problem is what can you get in return for these two? Now, if Klay Thompson was making $20 million, then I think that there'd be all kinds of suitors for Klay Thompson. I think teams would be lining up out the door, try to go get Klay Thompson for $20 million, just because of what he can still do. He's not the same player he once was, but just his shooting, his championship DNA, him being there, doing that countless times, hitting big shots, not afraid of the moment, right? Guy that at any night could just go off and go give you 30 plus, and doesn't need the ball in his hand, so he fits basically anywhere, right? He's a very valuable piece, but then you look at it as he's making $40 million. And there's just not many teams that have the salaries to go and match that, and then on top of that, still have a competitive roster. Now, there are a couple, a team like the Sixers. They have Tobias Harris's contract. I mean, even the Knicks, take Evan Fournier and a couple pieces, kind of package some stuff together, go get Klay. But it's tough, right? And you're probably parting with Julius Randle. Does that make sense, right? It's a tough spot to be in. So my problem is I don't know what the return would be for Klay Thompson. Chris Paul, you're kind of looking for, to me, you'd have to attach very likely a Moses Moody or a Jonathan Kuminga or something like that, and then maybe you could get a real piece. I've proposed the idea of trading Klay Thompson for Zach LaVine straight up. I think it's a win-win for both teams. I think now you got that consistent go-to scorer that can create for himself rather than Klay, great as he is, he needs setup, especially at this stage of his career, where Zach LaVine, you can just kind of give him the ball and let him go to work, and he can kind of provide what Andrew Wiggins was able to provide in that championship run, just that guy that can just take pressure off of Steph Curry, just go generate his own offense, go get buckets, and still make plays for others. And Zach LaVine has done a much better job of being that extender, that playmaker. I think that could be best case scenario. But then the question is, what can you get for Chris Paul, right? Could you maybe get, even if you could just turn Chris Paul into a quality rotation player, right? Not even saying a star or anything like that, just a guy that you could plug and play that makes sense, right? Maybe you give up some assets. A team could you go get a center, right? The New Orleans Pelicans, they're kind of teetering. They are the 7th seed right now, although they're tied for the 6th and only a game out of 5th. But they have wanted to get rid of Valanciunas because Valanciunas, he's going to leave in the offseason. They don't really want to pay him. And, they were trying to trade him in this past offseason and weren't able to do it. So they have fears that they're going to lose him. Could you maybe work something out to where you maybe get Valanciunas in another piece for Chris Paul, maybe give up a couple firsts or something, or a first or something? I know that doesn't sound great, but again, the Warriors are very limited. I know people are looking at it as you're really going to give up a first for Valanciunas. It's well, what other options do you really have? Right? it's not like the Warriors have this just great, like teams are lining up to help them and take on Chris Paul's contract, take on Klay's contract and all that stuff, right? If you could basically turn Chris Paul, Klay Thompson into Zach LaVine and Valanciunas, right? Now you have a starting lineup of, Steph, LaVine, Andrew Wiggins, Draymond Green, and Valanciunas. That's much better than the roster you have right now. And I think you can get back to being a contender. And Valanciunas is also an excellent playmaker. Again, I'm not saying you can. I'm just using a guy as an example. To where it's like, okay, now you got a real center to pair alongside Draymond, and Draymond could be the 4 and your defensive anchor. Andrew Wiggins, he doesn't have as much pressure to deliver, right? Which the other alternative is you trade the young guys, right? But my thing is like the Warriors, they got to pick a direction. What are you doing? Right? Because there's already conflicting reports that, hey, the Warriors have made Klay available. They're looking to trade Klay, blah, blah, blah. And then you get reports right after that's like, no, actually, they're not looking to trade Klay. They want to keep Klay. And it's like, okay, so what is it? What is their plan here? Right? Like, what is your goal? How are you turning this season around? Or are you just going to call this season a wash and just say, hey, you know what? It was fun while it lasted. We'll see how it goes next year. Or, because they're not, I just don't see them winning a championship. They're not. At best, if they're lucky and they go on some crazy run and turning it around, maybe they could catch like the 7th or 8th seed, right? But they're like 4.5 games out of the 8th seed. It's a lot of ground to cover. They're 5 games out of the 7th. That's a lot of ground to cover. Because not only do you have to win a bunch of games, but the teams in front of you have to lose a bunch of games. So that's probably, and a lot of these teams have tiebreakers against the Warriors because the Warriors have been so bad. It's just, I don't necessarily see how the Warriors cover that ground. So to me, it's like, got to pick a lane. If you want to keep Klay and you want to keep the vets and stuff like that, and you want to keep the big 3 together, then take Chris Paul, take Kuminga, take Moody, take whomever, and go make that push to go try to turn the season around, to go get that big impact player, to go get the pieces that you need that are necessary, right? If that's even out there, that's the problem is like, what is really out there that makes a world of sense for them? What is really out there that's like, okay, this is the guy, these are the guys that can really turn the season around? Because that's where the Warriors' dilemma is. There just doesn't seem like there's a plethora of talent out there that's just available and that the Warriors would be able to obtain, right? Now, look, there's probably all kinds of guys that are going to get traded that we haven't even heard their names or even thought about yet. I mean, you see that every year. Every year there's like, a couple handful of guys that you're like, oh, wow, they traded him? Like, oh, wow. Like even, I mean, there was even a trade with the Rockets. Like the Grizzlies. Anyone really think the Grizzlies were going to trade Steven Adams, right? Primarily, not because Steven Adams isn't a good player. If he was healthy and he was playing this year, I definitely think that they might have traded him, and some team might have been happy to take him. Even the Warriors might have been happy to take him. But he's not playing all season. He's out for the entire year. So it's like, did anyone really think that was going to... Like, there's always those weird random off trades where you're just like, oh, wow. So, maybe the Warriors can find 1 or 2 of those, get in on the action of 1 or 2 of those, and you're also going to have post-trade deadline, you're going to have some of these teams that just start tearing it down, right? You're going to have some of these teams that are like middle of the pack that just go, you know what, let's call it. Like, even look at Dallas last year, right? They had a chance to make the play-in. They were a play-in team. They were kind of hovering around. It was like, okay, if they win a couple games, they're only like 2-3 games out of a playoff spot. And they just said, you know what, let's just call it a year. Let's tank for a draft pick. And, look, they got Lively, and he's been really good for them. So there's going to be several teams that, decide, okay, we're just going to tear it down this year and start selling off some pieces. So there will be opportunities, I think, for guys that maybe make sense for the Warriors that they can get and plug in, but they got to pick a direction. Personally, I would keep Andrew Wiggins. Andrew Wiggins has not been the same player. He hasn't been the guy that he was in the championship run. But he has been getting a little more back to that. He's kind of getting back more into a rhythm and kind of been more assertive lately, which I like to see. And I just think The upside of Andrew Wiggins is better than anything you would get in return for Andrew Wiggins. Because how many teams are going to be looking to go and acquire Andrew Wiggins and take on his contract and give you a value in return? I just don't think you're going to be able to trade him for something that makes sense. Like, I don't think you're going to be able to trade him for a guy that's like, okay, great trade, right? I think you're just kind of either giving him away or you're doing a lateral move at best, right? To where me, it's like, you know what Andrew Wiggins is capable of. You know what's in there. So maybe go and kind of bet on that, right? I just think the upside, like I mentioned, the upside of Andrew Wiggins, I think, is higher than what you would get in a trade. So to me, it's like, just keep Andrew Wiggins, personally. It's kind of why I like the idea of swapping Klay for LaVine. And then, like I said, you have Steph, LaVine, Wiggins. Now Wiggins doesn't have to be your like second best player, right? He now can kind of be your consensus third option, and maybe that takes a ton of pressure off him, to where if he has the games where he has like 9 points or 10 points, it's not as bad. But the games where he does go off for like 25, 30, you probably never lose those games. I just think that would be good for them. So I like the idea of keeping Wiggins. And then also I like the idea of keeping Kuminga, right? Like, again, the more that I think about it, it's just like, go get Zach LaVine. I really do. I think that trade makes a lot of sense. Because you wouldn't have to trade Kuminga. You basically keep all your key guys that have been good, right? Keep Kuminga, right? Keep Wiggins. Go get LaVine. Now you have Kuminga. I mean, you could even start Kuminga if you wanted to, and have Draymond Green come off the bench, whatever, right? And have Steph, Kuminga, just for the athleticism and defense. But the Warriors got to do something. Steph is only getting older. The guy has been still otherworldly. He's so spectacular, but he doesn't have any consistent help. Now it's like one game, Klay will have a great game, and it's like, oh man, they won that game. And then the next game, it's like, oh, like Jonathan Kuminga has been arguably their second best player all season. And it's like, that wasn't supposed to be the plan, right? Like, Jonathan Kuminga, if you told me last year or the year earlier, right? Well, this is the second year, so it would have had to been last year. But like, if you told me last year that, man, Jonathan Kuminga is going to be basically like a 15-5 guy for you, or a 20-5 guy, and start looking like he could potentially be a star type thing, then I would be like, uh-oh, Warriors are really going to have a shot. Because, I mean, even last year, right? Like, they beat Sacramento. Yeah, they lost to the Lakers because they lacked size. And, but it's not like the Warriors weren't in that. And this is coming from a Laker fan, right? Like, that series had moments where it could have went either way, right? And it's like, man, you get that again. Jonathan Kuminga, if he can kind of have that Jordan Poole run for them, if Andrew Wiggins kind of get back in the swing of it. Like, again, if you told me this last year, I'd have been like, man, the Warriors are going to be terrifying. But they're just not, right? Because it's just like, Andrew Wiggins is a shell of his former self. Klay is a shell of his former self, right? I mean, like, even look at yesterday's game, right? You look at yesterday's game, you had, between Klay and Andrew Wiggins, they combined for what? 23 points, right? You had Andrew Wiggins, 9 points, 3 of 8 from the field, 1 of 2 from 3. And then you had Klay Thompson, 6 of 15 from the field, 2 of 9 from 3 with 14 points. So what's supposed to be your second and third best player, whichever one you think is their second, whichever one you think is your third, combined for 23 points. Steph gave you 26 and 6. Kuminga gave you 29. Again, Kuminga's been arguably their second best player all season. It's just like, I don't know, but they got to do something. They got to figure it out. But anyway, as always, this is a discussion. Pass the question on you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think? How do you feel? What do you think is the path for the Warriors? What do you think they should do? Do you think that they have any hope of turning around? Do you think no? Again, how do you feel? What your thoughts are? Love to hear it. Let me know down in the comments.